A very common question we get from people who need legal help is, what happens if I go to court on my ticket and the cop does not go to court? Does that mean my ticket is automatically going to be dismissed? In some situations it can, in other situations it can't. It really boils down to whether or not you were charged with a crime or just a civil offense, and we're going to talk about both of those. So many people who ask this question are charged with criminal speeding or reckless driving or some sort of a traffic violation, and so they'll see on the internet that people are saying if you go to court and the officer's not there, your case has to be dismissed. When it's a crime, the process is a lot more involved. The officer is only really involved at the very end of the case, if the case is going to a trial or to an evidentiary hearing where the officer needs to be a witness. So let's take a look at how a criminal process works. You have an arraignment, which is going to be the first court date on your ticket. Then you're going to have a series of pre-trial conferences. You may have a settlement conference, or you may have some extended negotiations with the prosecutor who's involved. And then you would have a trial. And so this process can take several months in a criminal case, especially a criminal speeding or a reckless driving type of a charge. And so as this all progresses, the officer is really not going to be involved in any of it. The prosecutor may have some conversations with that officer, but the officer's physical presence is only going to be required down here at a trial, when the officer would get a subpoena or get a request from the prosecutor to come into court. Aside from that, the officer doesn't need to be involved. The officer takes that ticket, they hand it over to the prosecutor, and the prosecutor is the government's attorney. So if the case is being scheduled for a trial and the officer is not available, the officer is injured, the officer is on vacation, the officer is busy with training or whatever it is, the prosecutor is going to ensure that this trial gets moved or that the officer can be present. They're going to call the officer and they're going to confirm that they can be there. So the likelihood that an officer is not going to be there in a criminal case is extremely low. We've had a couple situations where we have been scheduled for a trial and the officer does not appear, and the court will still continue the case or will push it on so that the officer can show up. We've argued for dismissals. We've had cases dismissed at that stage where the key witness, which would be the officer, is not there, but it's very rare. In most situations, the prosecutor and the judge will work together to make sure that the officer is there. So if you're charged with a crime, this is how that works. You cannot rely on the officer not showing up. So when can that happen? So let's take a look over here. If you're charged with a civil ticket, like a civil speeding ticket or a red light ticket or an unsafe lane change, and it's not a photo radar ticket, so this means that a live officer actually wrote you the ticket, that officer, again, does not need to appear at the very first court date. That's what's called an arraignment. That's the date on the ticket that you see that you have to appear. The officer takes that ticket, he turns it into the court, and you have a court date on there. You have to show up at that first court date, but the officer does not need to be there. In a photo radar type of a situation, you may have a separate hearing here that's called a service of process hearing, and the officer would not need to be present there either. This is to determine whether or not you were properly or adequately served with the photo radar ticket. At this hearing, the officer, the person reviewing the photo radar ticket, would not need to be there either. This is only for the person who actually completed the service. So the person who actually went to your residence and served you with the ticket, they would need to be there. But the officer who reviewed the photo radar ticket would not need to be there. The only time that the officer, the person who's responsible for issuing the traffic ticket, needs to be there is at a civil traffic hearing, and I have this abbreviated here for the CTH. Unless this is an accident case where other witnesses can come in and testify about the accident, if the officer just wrote kind of a standard civil ticket, like a speeding ticket or following too close or an unsafe lane change or any of those others that I mentioned, the officer does need to be there at that hearing. In most jurisdictions, so most cities around Arizona, there are no prosecutors involved in a civil case like this, unless the officer wants a prosecutor there to help, or unless the prosecutor jumps in because they see that a defense attorney is representing the defendant. Then sometimes that'll happen. But by and large, prosecutors are not involved. So if the officer is not here at the civil hearing, it's called a civil traffic hearing, then there's nobody there to testify against you. So if you show up and the officer is not there, he can't bring his case against you, the judge has no choice but to dismiss the ticket. What is the likelihood of that happening? It depends immensely by jurisdiction. It depends all over the place. So some courts, like the city of Scottsdale, the actual court, the judges, can check the officer's calendar, and they usually will set these civil traffic hearings on a Friday, so they can be almost positive that these officers are going to show up. Scottsdale, they show up almost every single time. And they don't negotiate with you, so it's not a good spot to get a traffic ticket in Scottsdale. Other jurisdictions are different. The city of Phoenix, it's hit or miss. The Department of Public Safety, the DPS officers around Arizona, they're all over the highways, they're all over the place. So unless these officers are setting a number of hearings back to back, meaning they cited 5 people and they're all scheduled for a hearing on that day, they may not show up. It totally depends. Some officers are very, very aggressive with these. Some aren't. Some will write somebody a ticket on the way to somewhere else, and then that's it. They forget about it and they never show up to court. Some police agencies will punish officers for not going to these hearings. They'll get in trouble for them. Some don't care. So it totally depends. So if you've been charged with one of these civil tickets and you are hoping that the officer doesn't show up, you can try your luck. It may or may not happen. If you want to speak with our office about how we specifically will win these tickets or negotiate them down or give you a better deal on a civil ticket, you can give us a call and we'll walk you through that as well. But predominantly the video is for people who have been charged with a criminal ticket. It's very important to understand that if you want to try to handle this on your own and you're putting your eggs in the cop doesn't show up basket, it's not going to be successful for you. The government has a lawyer, it's called a prosecutor, who is going to assist as this chain goes down, and as the case develops, the officer will be represented. So if they need to move things around, they will do that for them. So hope this helped explain that particular question. We get that question all the time. So if you have any other additional thoughts on it, if you have any questions, give us a call. Be happy to sit down with you, review your case specifically, and make sure you have a plan in place to move forward. Thanks for watching.